over to you, Marian.
Thank you, Galen. Just checking I'm not on mute. Excellent. Welcome, everyone. We're still opening the doors because there's still people coming. This is super to see how many people are showing up on such a beautiful night. My name is Marian. I'm a mom of 2 young kids, and I'm the North Vancouver team leader with 4 kids. A network of parents and grandparents across Canada working to address climate change. Now I'm speaking to you from Sedlem, just west of Duncan on Cochin territory, where I'm camping with my family. Couldn't have picked a better week. And most of you will be calling in from North Vancouver, which I want to acknowledge is the territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Now I'm very excited about tonight's town hall, and I think with everything happening in the world, couldn't be timelier. And I know there's a lot of other important town halls happening tonight. There's a lot of conversation and dialogue, which is awesome. And I'm very pleased to see that you chose to be at this one with this wonderful panel. And there are we have 3 levels of government in the room, so to say. City Councillor Jessica McIlroy and MLA Bowinn and Minister Jonathan Wilkinson. And then we have a moderator, Shayna Rector. I do want to do a quick introduction before I hand it over to Shayna of each of the panelists. So first of all, I want to introduce to you Jessica, who is the mother of 2 girls, I understand, and she is currently councillor with the City of North Vancouver and works with Climate Reality Canada as BC organizer for the Community Climate Hub Initiative. Now, she holds many hats and she currently sits on multiple boards, a lot related to climate action, and is, as said, very busy. So thank you again, Jessica, for being here tonight. Then we have Bowinn, who is the member of the Legislative Assembly for North Vancouver Lonsdale, and also the Parliamentary Secretary for TransLink. She's a licensed professional engineer and a certified project manager professional. And again, Bowinn, also, I know you're very busy. All of you are very busy. Thank you for being here tonight. And then Jonathan. So Jonathan, welcome. Since 2015, he's served as the MP for North Vancouver. And last year, as we know, he was appointed as Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Jonathan holds many years of experience working in the clean tech industry and is also a father of 2 girls, lots of girls. And then Shayna, she is a North Vancouver resident and mother to 2 young boys. Shayna is a communicator, bridge builder, facilitator. She was an entrepreneur working from Shell for a decade, trying to drive system change and convene conversations around energy transitions and climate change. Now she works to develop partnerships and secure funding to accelerate low carbon transitions. So I'm going to hand it over to Shayna, and I hope we'll have a very good, meaty discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Marian. Can everyone hear? Thumbs up. Great. Well, first of all, thank you to everyone that has worked hard to get all of us here tonight on this summer evening. There's a lot of folks behind the scenes, so thank you to them and those who have supported us to have this time to be here. We, of course, welcome any kids and grandkids that pop into the Zoom screen. We're all getting very used to that just now. And of course, they really ground us in the importance of this conversation tonight. So we're grateful for them. Like Marian did, I just want to acknowledge we are on the lands of the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations. This is where we're living, working, playing, raising, nurturing our families. And we're grateful to be here. I thank Chief Leah George Wilson for joining the town hall tomorrow night that's taking place in Vancouver. So just to make sure we know what we're all here for tonight, we're here to ask some questions to some of our locally elected leaders. We thank them for being here. And also the purpose is to help us as parents and grandparents and people in this community to understand some of the issues and how we can support and where we can add voice. So I hope that we go away from tonight feeling that way. So just a quick thing on format. In just a few moments, I will invite each Jessica, Bowinn, and Jonathan to share some opening remarks. And then I will go into a series of questions. I have attempted to distill these from the questions some of you submitted when you registered. I beg your forgiveness if I've changed the words or not represented you accurately, but I'm trying to merge a lot of different ideas into something that gets us to cover as much ground as we can. In the middle of this evening, I will invite Kate Sheardown. So she is the North Vancouver co-coordinator of a group called Sustainabiliteens. I'm going to invite Kate to ask our panelists a question, and then one of them to ask Kate a question. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Sustainabiliteens. Any hands up? Great to see. They've been in the news a lot this year, and I think we can be proud of the youth in our community and many communities around the world. They have been the organizers of some of the climate marches that have taken place. So Kate, thank you for your leadership. Just before we begin, and I do those opening remarks, Kate, I'd love to invite you to bring the youth of, or bring the voice of a child or a kid, you know, a kid, your teen, into the room. So just a quick question, Kate. Why did you choose to be on the call tonight? Why are you here?
Why am I here? I'm here because this is my fight and it's your fight, and we're all here for the same reason, even though there is differences in terms of, like, we're all here because we all want to see Canada and BC and North Vancouver justly recovered from COVID. So I'm here to offer a youth perspective, to offer perspective from someone who has marched in strikes with some anger, and who has also, like, it's all because I love this place, though, you know? Yeah.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, Galen, our trusty outdoor technical support, would you mind putting up the poll question? I have two just quick questions so we get a sense of the 100 or so of us that are on the call.
Yeah, here we go.
Thanks, Galen. If you can just click on all or any of these that apply for you, so we get a sense of who's on the call and what's your relationship to children in our community. Great.
So, Shayna, we ended up having both questions up. We've got both questions up there. So you know.
I'm unable to scroll down, but great, I can see the results. And question number 2, you can see right there. I'm just trying to ask how are we all feeling in relation to climate change here? I can't see the results, Galen, so could you read those out, the question number 2 for me?
Yeah, question 2 is, how do you feel right now in relation to the topic of climate change and a green and just transition? The options are optimistic and hopeful, committed and ready to work on solutions, angry and frustrated, tired and burnt out, in the dark, and you don't know where to start. So a whole spectrum of options. For me, if I hover my cursor right over question 1 and I scroll down on my computer, it's like with 2 fingers, I can scroll down, I can see the other question there. So I hope people are able to see it.
Thank you. Good to see the diversity we have on the call, and thanks for sharing how you're feeling to this important and sometimes challenging and other times inspiring topic. Panelists, if I could ask you to prepare to share your opening remarks. I just want to remind us all, we are here to have an interesting discussion tonight, and I know we've got a lot of passion on the call as well. That's very important. I invite us to work to be respectful and constructive. That's the purpose of this evening. In terms of order, could I ask Jessica, you to open, then could we hear from you, Jonathan, and then from you, Bowinn. So Jessica McIlroy, City Councillor from the City of North Vancouver.
Thank you, Shayna, and thank you for having me this evening, and for our kids for organizing this event. I always take great pleasure in any opportunity that I get to have to talk to youth or those that are working with youth and hearing the youth voice. And so very happy to see this group of people that are working hard to connect our families on the North Shore. So I was asked to provide some comments on myself and my background, what I think of a just and green recovery, why I got into politics, and all of those things. And that I could ramble on for about an hour with all of it and have lots of ideas. I'm going to try and keep it very brief and look forward to answering questions that are more directed around the type of work that we need to do. But my background is about 15 years of energy and climate industry development and policy discussions and work and advocacy. And that led to me running for City Council, because it did feel like that was the forum for me to be able to make a difference in the type of work that I really wanted to see done. I find that local government is the the level of government that really is the most connected to our people and to our community members. I take great pleasure and pride in being able to connect with the members of our community. And we also know that about half, if not a bit more than half, of our energy emissions or climate emissions are actually directly related to areas of jurisdiction that fall under local government. So the powers that we have of local government have, I think, a lot more influence than some people realize on what our emissions really are and our ability to adapt to climate change and to build the type of communities that we need. So that all relates to the decisions that local governments make around how we plan our communities and our land use planning, where we put roads, types of housing that we develop and where we put that housing. Are we building complete communities? And are we building transit-oriented communities? Are we thinking of the people and where we're putting all of our infrastructure? So there's a lot of really fascinating work that we do at the city that I will be happy to answer questions about as we dig in, and look forward to hearing what people have to say. So thank you.
Jonathan, hear from you.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes, thank you.
All right. So, I mean, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be with you this evening, and certainly thank you to the organizers. I think it's a very interesting forum with a mix of youth and parents and others, but certainly I think it's great that young people in the community are getting so active and engaged in this issue and in others. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am participating from the traditional and ancestral territories of the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I got into politics only not even 5 years ago, largely as a result of my concerns about climate change. I, as many of you, am a parent of teenage daughters. Well, I guess my eldest is 20, so I guess she's not a teenager anymore. But before I got into politics, I was involved in the clean tech space, working mainly on technologies that relate to how you can mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in many industrial applications. Over the past few months, certainly Canadians and their governments have been very much preoccupied with the COVID-19 issues, and that I think has been entirely appropriate given what we've been facing. It has certainly caused a lot of tragedy for many Canadians, and certainly has caused many Canadians to have challenges in their lives. And I think the health and safety and the well-being of Canadians has been a top priority of all governments at all levels through this process. But we have, at least for now, and we will need to continue to be vigilant, move through the phase of flattening the curve, and we're in this sort of cautious relaxation phase and are starting to contemplate what a recovery can look like. And I think that gives us an opportunity to take a bit of a step back and to consider the kind of society that we ideally want to work towards creating. Certainly, COVID-19 has revealed a number of things about our society that I think we are going to need to reflect upon, including, seniors' residences and medical supply chains and all kinds of things. But certainly recovery is going to have to help us to think about the crises that are looming on the horizon. And those are both climate change, but also the global loss in biodiversity. Those are like a locomotive that is running towards us slowly, but eventually is going to reach us. And if we don't act to change the course of those trains, the effects are going to be far more devastating than what we've seen from COVID-19. So that is something that we need to reflect on. And I think that's where this whole conversation around Build Back Better comes from. I would say that recovery is important in terms of the short term, but I would caution that it's not just about short-term actions. They're going to need to be short, medium, and long-term things that we're going to need to do here in Canada if we're going to achieve the net zero future that scientists tell us that we must. We're going to have broad public support. We're going to have an integrated and coherent plan. We're going to have cooperation amongst different levels of government. We're going to have the engagement of the private sector and the deployment of private sector capital. And we're going to have to focus on reducing the key areas where emissions are significant in this economy. And in Canada, that's transportation, it's industry, oil and gas, steel, a number of others. It's buildings, it's electricity production, and then it's waste and agriculture. And we need to actually be moving forward in all of those areas. So deploying zero emission cars, looking at how we deploy zero emission heavy duty vehicles, more public transit, and making sure that those are zero emission buses. We need to think about retrofits of homes and how we actually incent new business models for commercial, as well as new building codes to ensure that we're building net zero buildings. We need to have those kinds of initiatives in all of the key areas of emissions. We're going to need ideas from Canadians of all ages. We're going to need input from environmental organizations, from industry, Indigenous leaders about how we can go faster. We will need active collaboration between all levels of government, and we will need strong and active voices calling for governments to do more. At the end of the day, climate change should not be a partisan issue. It's a science issue. And unfortunately in Canada today, it remains a partisan issue. I think we all need to strive to get beyond that. And the way you do that is that you actually create broad public consensus that governments of any political stripe need to take aggressive action on climate change. And the start of that is to work on how we build back better from this crisis.
Thank you, Jonathan. Bowinn, can we hear from you, please?
Well, thank you so much. I've been told that I'm a little bit quiet, so I'll hold it up here. So I'd love to begin by acknowledging where I'm streaming from as well, and I'd love to do so in the language of the Squamish peoples. So xʷməthkwəy, Musqueam, Skwxwu, lwətaʔ, Musqueam, Skwamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Bowinn ma Queensna, Chinkumantomiya. So what I've said or attempted to say in the language of the Squamish peoples is, hello everyone, I'm very happy to be with all of you here today. And we are of course on the territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh. My name is Bowinn ma, and thank you so much for your kind attention. There's so much that I want to say in my opening remarks that I'll purposely and very intentionally try to keep them short, because I do believe that there's a lot of value for us to be able to talk together and have conversations rather than have me talk at you for the next hour or so, which I could probably fill pretty easily. But I want to acknowledge that the pandemic has been incredibly difficult for all of us in BC and in North Vancouver and truly across the world. It has changed all of our lives, and it has amplified a lot of problems that we were already facing, like poverty, precarious work, addictions, and the overdose crisis, and systemic racism and inequality. For people who were already struggling with these things, navigating the pandemic has been even more difficult. But the pandemic has also magnified the importance of community values like equity, sustainability, reconciliation, and caring for our neighbors and everyone around us. And it's these values that have helped us to flatten the curve. And these are the same values that we need to carry with us into our economic recovery and into the future, especially as we talk about, and not just talk, but take action on the other global crisis that we are facing, which of course is climate change and a lack of biodiversity, as MP Wilkinson has said. And a green and just recovery will be one that doesn't just settle for merely going back to the way things were. I remember in the beginning of the pandemic when things were really going, for lack of a better term, going sideways, and people were feeling anxious and their lives had been uprooted and taken apart at the seams. And I remember people asking and wondering to themselves when we will ever go back to normal. And then as time went on, we realized that back to normal, it just wasn't good enough. It's not good enough. We need better than normal. So we need to strive to build more sustainable, just and equitable communities for everyone. And that includes making sure that people have good jobs, a living wage, affordable housing, quality and affordable childcare, access to post-secondary education, skills training, and of course, quality healthcare and for healthcare for everyone, including seniors. But it also means creating a sustainable, long-term economy that takes the environment into account. We need to be thinking long-term, and we need to be making sure that we're prepared for the challenges of the future. MP Wilkinson and Councillor McIlroy have already listed a whole bunch of things that we need to do, and there are a lot of them. But we have to do them. We've got a lot of work to do, but we will get there if we go there together.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you to the three of you. As well, painting a picture of the issues at the various levels of government, and also having us reflect on the very important other part of the framing for this evening, and that's the equity piece. How can this recovery really, you know, the raising tides raise all boats is needed. So we thank you for that. I'm going to go into one of the questions, or actually it's a question we received from a few people. So I'm going to merge together what we received from Laurent Mingo and Carlin Ragasi, and apologies if I did not say your names accurately. So Laurent began, first, I want to acknowledge and thank the federal government for the widespread and unprecedented support, I would add all levels of government, it has been providing Canadians, people and businesses through the ongoing COVID-19 crisis. Still, I sometimes feel there's broken promises and conflicting actions. I paraphrase there. The question for all three of our esteemed panelists tonight is, what is the boldest action that your government is hoping to take to make sure we radically reduce emissions and advance a green and just recovery? Now, as each of you pointed out, there's many things we can do. We'd like to hear the one you are most committed to, and just so we can get a picture of the issues. Who would like to begin?
I can start if nobody else is starting, if that helps. Is that right? All right, excellent. So our government has a climate action strategy plan, or climate action strategy in place, and it is called Clean BC. It is currently the most aggressive climate action strategy in North America, and it intends, or that it sets out legislatively targets of GHG emission reductions that are 40% by 2030, 60% by 2040, and 80% by 2050. I'm just checking my numbers to make sure I got that right. 40 by 2030, 60 by 2040, and 80 by 2050. And these are overall blended emissions. I know that people will often refer to the report that notes that we need to be carbon neutral by 2050, 100% carbon neutral by 2050. I'll note that our BC's targets are a blended rate. So it's not just carbon dioxide. We're also talking about black carbon and methane, which are substantially more, more damaging as greenhouse gases. So the IPCC report actually indicates that by 2050, if I remember my numbers correctly, because it's been a little while since I've taken a look at them because of COVID-19, sadly, but by 2050, reductions on methane and black carbon need to be about 30%. So not 100% reduction, but about 30%. So the blended rate together actually lines up quite well with BC's climate action strategy, which is Clean BC. Now, there is a lot of work that has to go into actually making sure we hit those targets. But the important thing about Clean BC is that they're not just targets as a regulatory targets, or they don't just exist in a report, but they actually exist in legislation as well. So that is a key focus of our government in terms of any sort of economic recovery or any move forward in economic growth. As we move forward, it all has to fit into Clean BC. I think that's, yeah, I'll leave it there for others to add in.
I'm happy to take a cut at that. I think it's important to note that the just and the green, while they may be related, may not be the same thing. And I would say that with respect to a just recovery, part of that actually is making sure that we're actually addressing the impacts that were felt most significantly by particular groups. And in this case, you know, the employment losses were disproportionately women, racialized communities, and most particularly young people. And the other group that was most impacted, obviously, were senior citizens living in retirement homes. So I think a just recovery means that you actually need to ensure that you are accounting for and looking to address those people who were most significantly impacted by the virus. Green is not just about climate change. It is about biodiversity as well as climate change. And certainly from my perspective, and I think from the federal government's perspective, the key elements that we must provide and work with Canadians from coast to coast to provide are an enhanced climate plan that details how we will meet and exceed, which is what we've committed to do, our 2030 Paris targets, and active work to define the pathways to 2050 that includes binding legislation and 5-year increments.
Great. I will jump in with thoughts from the city perspective then, if you're finished, MP Wilkinson.
Yep.
So the city is working on right now on developing a new climate action plan. So we did set our targets to align with the IPC science and are doing those steps and reviewing all the things that we have done to date, where the gaps and where we need to get to. But I think the boldest thing that we're actually doing is we've committed as a council to create the healthiest small city in the world. And for me, human health is actually a very crucial piece of the picture. And our mayor is a public health nurse, and it was her vision, and council came behind that vision with the recognition that we need to work on our social structures, our social resilience, and our social sustainability. We need to address all of our aspects of human health so that we can actually bring everyone together and take the steps that we need to take to address climate, because we have too many people in our population that are at an extreme level of their capacity for concern for their own well-being, and they're trying to be, they're trying to address affordability and finding childcare, finding food for their tables, and all of our basic needs. And there's a very high level of stress on a lot of people in our community. And if we don't help bring everybody to a healthier state of social resilience, then we can't bring everybody towards a sustainable future. And so I think what's very important for government and what's crucial right now is for us to actually step back and watch what's happened over the past number of months, of how community has come together and how people have helped each other, how we have actually had a collective response to the COVID pandemic in a way that we know we need a collective response to climate change, and people have done it on their own. And they've come together in a beautiful way that wasn't pushed on them by government, but that was led from community groups finding their own feet. And so us as the city are actually taking the time to, in a very meaningful way, find ways that we can ensure that that collective action is supported moving out of the pandemic, and that we can keep those community groups together and keep that actually moving forward. We've talked a lot about all of the steps and hard work that needs to be done to address climate mitigation measures, adaptation measures, and biodiversity, and I agree with all of those. But we need to take, I think, some time to think about what it is we're measuring and what are the metrics, because if it's going to be just and it's going to be equitable, then we have to think about how that measures up with what we're actually measuring for emissions reductions. And so my example for that is there's a lot of discussion on the subsidizing of electric vehicles and supporting the advancement of electric vehicles, which we need to do. And I'm not saying we don't need to do it. It's one very important piece of our puzzle. But there's criticism from some that we continue to subsidize and support the people who already have means. And the people who are able to buy those vehicles are people who already have economic means and the financial ability to step up and do what we need them to do. But if you invest that money in transit or in active transportation infrastructure, then you're actually creating a more equitable platform for more people to be able to be a better part of their, be a part of their community, and as well as decreasing our emissions profiles. So I think it's time for us to take a step back and really think about what it is we're measuring, what it is we're seeing our community members do on their own, and how they're coming together during this time, and what we can harness. And more than ever, I think, look at how the 3 levels of government that are represented this evening, but as well as our First Nations governments and all levels of government, are working together and really aligning our policies, aligning our regulations, and aligning our investment and how we're moving forward. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I see tremendous opportunity right now.
Thank you to the three of you, and thank you to those that have been commenting in the chat as well. Comments around, can we be measuring and reporting on how we're doing more frequently, and how terms for our goals, how they're in or not in step with government terms. All of this is great information. I think it's important we stay focused in using the opportunity to see each other here as well. And Jessica, I really appreciate you bringing in the health side of this. As we said at the beginning, the justice piece is so important. And really, that may be the great opportunity we're seeing in the pain that we've had in 2020 is how all of these systems are interconnected, and how we have to start, as you say, every dollar that goes into our stimulus right now and into climate recovery really needs to work a few times over and do a few things. I'm going to keep moving forward, and I have been pointed out, maybe I will not name who has provided the questions, because I appreciate some people may not wish to be named. So while I reflect on the other questions we received and take a moment to read the chat here, Kate, could I invite you to come off of mute, and could you put a question to our elected representatives, please?
Yes. So yeah, is that?
Yeah. Kate's going into grade 11 at Carson Graham in the fall in the IB program, and tonight I believe she's joined by her mom. Michelle's there too.
Hey, this is Michelle. Yeah, I'm Kate. I co-coordinate the Sustainability Teams chapter on the North Shore, and my question from me, but really from the youth of the North Shore who are engaged in politics, is we want to know, because, sorry, yeah.
Oh, I think we're having a problem with our mic. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
We can hear you okay, Kate. Michelle.
Okay. So, specifically.
Okay. Sorry, I have some, I'm just gonna.
Okay. So Kate and I were talking a lot about this before, and there's so much information that's coming at us quickly right now in terms of just recovery, and hearing all of the things that the politicians have to say. And I appreciate that it's not easy to figure out this really difficult issue. So getting down to some specifics about what is the plan, what is the next step, what are you doing tomorrow to make this happen?
I should say that I'm really impressed with the conversation that is happening here and everything that's been brought up and all these great ideas that are coming out about how this just recovery can happen. And I really just want to see it happen. And I'm fearful that it's not going to.
I can start, so I can send us in a reverse order from last time.
Okay. Thanks, Jessica.
No, great question. And so just one thing that I am doing on a continual basis, and will do tomorrow and the next day, is I'm spending a lot of time trying to understand the barriers to the actions. And so what is it that so in my opinion, we know what we need to do. They're actually simple changes. If we think of no longer using fossil fuels in our vehicles and no longer using fossil fuels to heat our homes, the technology exists, we understand what that shift is, but it's a very difficult thing to achieve. So what is it that's making it difficult? And so for our community and at my scale of government within the city, we're doing a lot of work, and I'm working with staff to try and understand what can we do to help people make those shifts? What's preventing them from making those shifts? And who are the partners that we need to bring in, and who are the table mates that we need to create and have a conversation so that we can move forward, because it's not happening fast enough. even though we know what needs to happen, it's not happening at the rate that we need it to. So we're doing a lot of work to try and understand what some of those barriers are.
I can go unless you want to go, Bowinn.
Whatever you wish. I'm happy to let you go.
All right. If it's reverse order, I guess I'm doomed to be stuck in the middle all the time.
We'll have you start next.
Fair enough. So it's a tough question. I guess I would say, you know, I obviously have the great fortune to be the Member of Parliament for North Vancouver, but I also have the great privilege to be the minister responsible for environment and climate change in this country. And so every day I go to work, the vast majority of my time is spent either on climate change issues or biodiversity issues or other environmental initiatives around, you know, the reform of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act or plastic pollution in our environment. For me, the focus right now is on the enhanced climate plan that will need to demonstrate to Canadians how we can meet and exceed our Paris targets. And some of the heavy lifting on that in certain areas has largely been done. So we have, you know, agreed that we are phasing out the use of coal in this country by 2030. There's been a lot of good work done at many municipal levels around waste and around capping landfills and creating renewable natural gas from organics and those kinds of things. But the areas where we really need more action is transportation. It is a quarter of our emissions in this country, and that is going to be a mixture of, you know, enhanced public transit, but it's also going to have to be about the deployment of zero emission vehicles, whether those are electric or they're fuel cell vehicles. And that's not just light duty vehicles that we drive, those are heavy duty vehicles that we need to actually displace. It's about buildings. Buildings is not an easy one. I mean, getting to a net zero building code that means that every building after 2030 is net zero, that's doable. And there's a development of a building code right now going on federally that we will need the provinces to implement. And I have great confidence that George Heyman and Bowinn and others at the provincial level will be working hard to ensure that does get implemented. But retrofitting all of the existing building stock, every house, every large commercial facility is going to need to be retrofitted. And so creating the tools and the incentives and to ensure that we get going on that, because we don't have a lot of time, is going to be really critical. And then targeting some of the high emitting industries. We have to figure out a way to not use metallurgical coal in steel manufacturing. We have to begin the process of significantly reducing emissions from the oil and gas industry in this country. Those are the critical things that we need to make significant progress over the next, you know, few months.
Okay, so it is my turn. Hold on, is my, oh, okay, yes, I'm unmuted now. Fantastic. So I had mentioned Clean BC earlier in my response to the earlier statement. That is something actionable that British Columbia is doing, and it is something that we have been working on for at least, I think it was passed about a year ago. So it's been underway for at least a year, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. My timelines are starting to get melted together. But what Clean BC does is, as I mentioned, it sets it sets GHG emission reduction targets for the province, and it also funds a plan to help us get there. So what this means is that there are actively funds available right now for household, for homeowners to install a more energy efficient heat pump and to move off of fossil fuels. So there are rebates and grants available for households to do that. There are rebates and grants available for businesses and commercial businesses to do that right now. It also means moving us towards cleaner transportation. As MP Wilkinson said, transportation is a huge part of our emissions. In British Columbia's emissions, it's about 1/3. It's not a quarter, it's even higher than that. It's 1/3 of our emissions. And so that's, so how do we move people away from using fossil fuels in their cars, and even more importantly, to move away from cars entirely? Because to move somebody from a car, a fossil fuel-based car, to an electric car saves less energy and GHG emissions than you do by moving a person from a fossil fuel car into a bus. That's where you really get GHG benefits. Now, the caveat there is the bus has to actually be filled with people, which isn't happening during COVID-19 right now. But when buses are actually operating with substantial ridership, there are huge GHG emissions savings from that. But in order to enable public transportation to be an option for people, we also have to be building communities that actually put people close to where they live, work, put people close to where they work, play, go to school, shop, and so forth. So they're living close to all of these places, which also enables active transportation, which produces pretty much zero GHGs except for the GHGs that we emit as we're breathing. And you can breathe quite heavily biking up a North Van hill, I understand, but it's nowhere near the amount of emissions that we produce by driving up there in our cars. We're also working right now to divert waste from landfills and reducing polluting emissions, and of course, investing in clean energy jobs. So trying to shift the economy is probably the most important part of all of this, because economic inertia really holds us back, especially in a province like British Columbia, especially in a country like Canada that is so resource intensive. So much of our economic wealth comes from resource extraction, which is very far away from urban centers, which means you're transporting a lot of these goods and resources a long way, which of course adds to the transportation emissions. But the question that was answered, I don't know if it was asked, but it was certainly answered and addressed by both Jessica and Jonathan about why is this so difficult, right? Why is it so difficult for us to address climate change? And I think part of it is that it is still a partisan issue, sadly, that not every political party believes that climate change, addressing climate change is a priority. And so even as British Columbia has Clean BC and it is, like I said, the most aggressive climate action strategy in North America, it's still just the base minimum that every single province and every single state should be doing. So it doesn't actually help that British Columbia is the only one trying to attempt this. If we have Ontario or Quebec or anywhere down in the States, if any of the states aren't also moving in the same direction, British Columbia as a province of $5 million gets easily overtaken by emissions produced somewhere else. The other issue is that the right thing to do, even when you have a government or leaders or strategists or political leaders and community leaders who, even when they agree that climate action is important, the strategy and how you move forward on it is not always clear. Like what the right thing to do isn't always clear. And I'd love to bring up a bill that's generated a little bit of controversy recently, and it's a provincial bill. It's called Bill 17. And Bill 17 does a number of things. It's a Clean Energy Amendment Act. I mean, it does a number of things. Three things in particular. One is it establishes a 100% clean energy standard for British Columbia, which means that 100% of the energy that British Columbia produces must be from clean renewable energies, or electricity produces must be from clean renewable energy, and 100% of the electricity that it delivers to households has to be clean. Now you're kind of thinking, well, if you're producing clean electricity, why isn't it also being delivered to households? And the reality is that BC Hydro trades electricity on the open market, and it trades electricity with states, specific states. So as an example, right now, even without Bill 17, British Columbia purchases surplus solar electricity from California when it is available. And when it's surplus, it's actually quite cheap. So we'll purchase it here, and then they'll hold back on the dams so that the water in the hydroelectric dams builds up again, and then they'll turn them back on at night to sell clean electricity back to California at a much higher rate when California is in a deficit. So that's something that happens right now. But we also trade, buy low, sell high on the wholesale market, and the wholesale market is it's a blend of clean and dirty energy. So some of that electricity, a lot of it on the wholesale market, is actually produced by fossil fuels. That means British Columbia is producing clean electricity, but actually also bringing in dirty electricity and then distributing it into the households. So Bill 17 deals with that and says 100% has to be clean. But the other piece that's much more controversial is Bill 17 removes a clause known as the self-sufficiency clause for a self-sufficiency mandate. And what this means, the self-sufficiency mandate was brought in by previous governments in order to ensure that British Columbia generated all of the electricity that it needed inside the province, right? So, and that makes sense. We want to have energy security, and also, I mean, just not being dependent on electricity from other places. But the problem with the self-sufficiency clause is that electricity produced, oh, actually two things. First, there's a self-sufficiency clause, and then governments prevented BC Hydro from actually expanding their capacity. So what ends up happening then is that the private power that is produced in British Columbia is not competitive. We're talking the price of the private power that's being produced in British Columbia. In some cases, the contracts, we're paying 500% of what market rate of that electricity is. Okay, 500%, not like 10, 20% more, but 500% of that, which means that we don't have electricity that is affordable. Now, in order to convert people, sorry, I'm going.
A few more questions.
So
I'm going to need you to wrap it.
So in order to convert people from fossil fuels into clean electricity, you need abundant, affordable clean electricity, which is self-sufficiency clause prevented. But removing it means that we have the option of buying out of province, which is very controversial. So what is the right answer here? In both cases, there is an argument for producing clean electricity and the transition over to clean electricity, but it's still a highly controversial move. So this is kind of an example of why the actual right answer isn't always a clear one. And when it isn't clear and there's a lot of debate back and forth, it ends up getting stalled out in politics.
Yeah. And the complexity surfaces, and we're getting close to the close. So, I mean, there's so many questions that have come forward, and they're coming forward in the chat. To try to summarize, there's one we do certainly have to ask. There's a lot of questions about how some of the carbon intensive projects that are proceeding square with our reduction targets. And I again know this is a very complex response. Jonathan and Bowinn, if I could just hear a quick response to that. How does our existing industry square with our ambitions, and what's our transition? Jonathan?
Sure. So certainly there are lots of opinions on this. There's no question. And this relates to people lump oil and gas together. They're actually quite different, but I think, you know, people would refer within the case of oil to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and in the case of gas to projects like LNG Canada. And I would say a couple things. I mean, we are moving through a transition which means that for a number of years to come, we will continue to use oil and gas. You know, the deployment of electric vehicles in Canada right now is about 1%. So it is going to require a lot of deployment, and we're going to have to expedite the work that's being done on that before we get to the point where Canadians are not using any gasoline in their cars or in their heavy duty trucks or in their airplanes or in their boats. The same is true with natural gas, with the added issue with gas, which is that in some circumstances, and you have to be clear that you're tying these directly, but if you can displace coal with natural gas, you do see a significant emissions reduction as part of a transition. Ultimately, though, as we move towards a net zero future, we will have to move to a point where we are not using fuels that produce carbon pollution.
We lost you. We lost your audio for some reason. Try again.
Now you're back.
No, you're still gone. He's not on mute.
No. So while Jonathan pulls that together, Bowinn, would you like to comment on some of the projects here in BC, or could I talk to us about even a follow-on?
Yeah, are you sure you want me to speak again? I just took up a whole bunch of time. I'm
going to be more specific. I mean, sort of the jobs level. I mean, there's been a big shuffle in your government recently and where people are sitting. Can you give us a quick example of, not a quick example, but an example of how you're stimulating green jobs? This is the work we're hoping our kids will be doing. What's happening now to stimulate that part?
In order to keep it short, I'll think about I'll mention one specific thing, which is our government's push right now for mass timber projects. So mass timber, also known as engineered wood products, is a innovative material out here in British Columbia that can be used in buildings in replacement of concrete or steel. And it's a renewable resource as well. It's also a resource that can be produced by using basically scrap wood. So it's a high value use of our forest resources, much more high value use than just chopping down trees and shipping them overseas. By actually manufacturing them here and then using them to build here, we can create greener buildings while producing more local high quality jobs out of our forest resources.
Thank you, Bowinn. Jonathan, do you want to try to finish there? Is your sound back?
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay. I would say that that there certainly are opportunities from a technology perspective to look at how can you get to the point where you can extract hydrogen from not only fossil fuels, but obviously from renewables where you can use electrolysis, but from fossil while you leave the carbon in solid form or in the ground. At the end of the day, the problem is carbon. It's not the source of the energy. And so I think that, you know, in the context of a net zero world, we obviously can't be using fuels that produce significant amounts of carbon. But that doesn't necessarily mean there aren't pathways from a technology perspective to allow us to continue to extract value from our resources without carbon.
I can't keep up with everything that's going in the chat and respectfully get us out on time here, everyone. So we're asking really all important questions. I do invite the resources. I mean, the Clean BC plan, you're right, Bowinn, there's a lot of details in some of the questions being asked here. There's some frustration being expressed in the chat around a sense of incrementalism and a call for brave action. Just to get a little bit more, what can we as individuals do? Those who are in a position to think about choices they make. Jessica already talked, as a few of you already talked to the vehicle side of things. And yes, it's a privilege if you own the assets or buying the assets. Jessica, I just wondered if maybe you could point to some of the resources here at the local level of where we can find out about incentives for green retrofits or making choices in our own homes.
Sure. So at a city level, we, on our website, under the Living City or Climate Action Areas, you know, just searching both of those, there's a lot of information. And I will say that since Clean BC has had the incentive in place for heat pumps in our homes, the City of North Vancouver has topped up that incentive and there's been an even greater amount available. But since that time, we have not had one person apply for that incentive. And so that is a big piece of what we're trying to work on, is why aren't we reaching people? Why aren't people making that choice? And why are, you know, if they're, what are the decisions or barriers that we're facing for those types of actions? So we are doing everything we can to help individuals and community members make those types of changes. We just approved money on Monday that was going to go towards installing another 20 electric vehicle charging stations around the city. And we're doing what we can as a city to provide that electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We're doing what we can to work on the active transportation piece as well. So the Open Streets program that we've put in place is in response to COVID to try to provide physical distancing space for pedestrians and cyclists, but also recognizing that it's a shift we need to continue to make and have in our plan to provide more mobility lanes. But I'll say that, in my opinion, I think what what is extremely important for all of us, and especially for us when we think of our children and how they're going to be involved and teens being involved, is an understanding of the decision makers and how government works, how to get involved, how to have a voice. And so I'm incredibly proud of the work that sustainability teams have done. They've come to the Metro Vancouver Climate Action Committee that I sit on more than once and made very informed requests and very clear actions that they want to see happening. And we've listened to those and we're taking them into consideration. And I will say that we don't actually hear enough voices from our community members coming forward and telling us either what they need or what they want us to do, but also telling us what's working and do more of this and stay going down this path. So I hope that everybody, my sense is that everyone who's participating tonight is pretty politically engaged and on top of the subject, but ensure that our youth are on top of the subject, that they're voting, that when it comes to election time, that they get out and they vote for their values and they vote on climate and they hold politicians to account and they ask the parties to actually have real concrete plans. So that civic engagement and political engagement is extremely important for us to be able to get where we need to go to, so that there's a council of 7 of us and we're all very supportive of climate action, but not all of us have the same sense of urgency. And so the more voices that we can hear, the more that everybody understands what we need to do and how urgent our response needs to be.
We're coming up on time here. I'm going to invite each of you to say a closing remark, and I'd really like to just bridge from what Jessica said. There's frustration being expressed in the chat. There's so much to cover. I think we're hearing a collective sense on this call, and it's not surprising that we want more urgency here. So the same level of urgency and crisis response we've been able to mobilize these last months. How do we do this for the green transition? So in your closing remarks, if there's something we as parents and members of this community can be doing to help you have a sense that you have agency, political will, us demanding a green reset, if you can comment on how we can express that. Could we start with, let's start at the top. Let's start, Jonathan, at the federal level. What can we do to help you feel supported?
Sure. I guess I would say a couple things. The first is starting with maybe your last point and then going through. So certainly I think communities and groups within communities coming together to make a statement that this is really important and it needs to be at the top of the list of priorities for governments at all levels is extremely important. Saying that to all political parties is important because ultimately what we need to do in this country is create a broad consensus that action is required and it's required in the immediate term. So I think that's what I would say is certainly what folks should be thinking about doing. And I think the most powerful voices, to be honest with you on this, are young people. In terms of going forward, I mean, this is a crisis. There is urgency. There is no question about that. And we need to be taking bold steps to be working through the process of reducing our emissions. But we also, at the same time, need to think about how we do that and what the timeline is for accomplishing that. I mean, 2 of the biggest sources of emissions are buildings and transportation. They account on their own for almost 40-some% of Canada's emissions. We need to be thinking about how do you actually retrofit every home? How do you retrofit every commercial building that exists today? That is something that actually could employ lots of folks as we move forward in jobs that are not just clean tech jobs. But it's something that is an enormous undertaking that is going to take not 1 year and not 2 years and not 10 years. It's going to take time. And it is certainly true that we need to get going on the building side, and we need to continue to focus on the deployment on the transportation side. We need to focus on public transit, as Bowinn and I were talking about earlier. I mean, the federal and provincial governments came to an agreement today to put more money into public transit to try to actually ensure that we are moving forward and we are sustaining the public transit systems that are so important from a transportation perspective. And we need to ensure that climate change is part of every decision that we make, that we think about climate in the context of the decision making at all levels of government. And that is something that I think certainly is being done at the federal level, and I know it is being done at the provincial level. And from my conversations with Linda Buchanan and others, I know it's being done at the municipal level. It is something, though, that is urgent, and we need to move.
Bowinn, how can we back you and have it be heard in Victoria that we want a green and just transition? Be short, please, because we're starting to be at the time.
So everything that Jonathan said, and adding to that, we are currently engaging the public on how to create our economic recovery here in BC. And I really, really, really recommend every single person here participate in that consultation, because overwhelmingly, while there are lots of people in British Columbia who believe that climate action is necessary, there are still way more voices who are voting on pocketbook issues, on jobs in resource sectors and so forth. And a lot of that is because we have a lot of inequality here in British Columbia as well. So when you're working for minimum wage, it's really hard to put aside your ability to meet your bills on time, to use your voice for climate action. And so for those of us who are privileged enough to have the opportunity to speak up in favor of climate action, please do so. And the website is engage.gov.bc.ca/recovery ideas. And I think it's open until the 21st. So we have a week left, and I hope that all of you participate in that engagement survey.
Just the closing words, and then over to Marian and Galen to close for us.
I think I already sort of referenced this a bit, so I will keep it very brief. Us at the city have a website that's up as well called letstalk.cnv.org, and we really want to hear from people on everything that's been going on in the past number of months with COVID, with where you want to see the city going. But again, it's about people getting involved and hearing your voices and you know, coming together and being able to really vocalize what you want to see happening. And I think it's also, you know, I don't want to just point fingers at the other levels of government, and I know that they do incredible work, and I'm always proud to work with Bowinn and Jonathan. But I also want us to have a conversation around how local government is funded and how we get our money and how we can better work together with the federal and provincial government when we have, when as cities, we have a greater financial opportunity to do so. And so there's, I think there's some civic engagement and civic learning that I would love to see our citizens do to really help understand and work with us on what type of structures we need. It's not just about the actions, but it's actually about the policy structures and the funding and financial structures that we need in order to make the decisions and actions that we need to make.
Thank you all. I'm just going to close with a quote that was also it was brought up by the MP from Walnut Grove in the Surrey town hall that for our kids convened last week. And he quoted the following. He said, "Some see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not?" So thank you three for pointing out, we know what we need to do. We have many of the technology solutions in front of us. And I think those of us on the call this evening, we are behind you, and we ask you, Jessica, Bowinn, and Jonathan, when you represent our voices in Ottawa and Victoria and down just off of Lonsdale, that yeah, we faced a challenging time with COVID, but we count on you for your bold and brave leadership to make the transition happen now. Kate, did you want to do one closing word? What struck you most? And then Marian, could you tell us how to find out about for our kids? Kate?
I really would like to do one last closing word, and I would like to, I guess, apologize for how flustered I got, and that was because it's so daunting when you're in this room with these people who have so much power, so much more than you, to end the climate crisis or at least mitigate it. And what can you say to these people to make them see how urgent it is? And what do you say? Oh my God, what do you say? And I think that there's so much urgency that's being expressed in the chat, and there's so many like wonderful things that you guys are saying is being worked on, and I really do believe that it is, and that you have Canada and BC's best interests at heart. So, but you need to, echo this urgency. I echo this urgency that is in the chat, and until we see these things that are being worked on, until we see them happening, we're still going to be marching in the streets. So and join us, please, because that's how we're going to make change happen.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Marian.
Thank you so much, Kate, for closing it off. I will be marching with you on the streets. There was a lot of emotion today, and I understand the complexities, and I think I commend the panel for being here in this time where there's so many heated questions. I also want you parents, grandparents, to step up. We cannot leave this to our kids. There is not enough time to let them figure this all out on their own. So please find us on Facebook for our kids, North Vancouver. There is a welcome meeting happening on July 28th. I really encourage you to send us a message that you want to get involved. And it is not about like getting 20 hours of your time. It's as little time as you can invest, because I know how thinly stressed we are. But this is a matter of, I think Kate already pointed it out. So I love to hear from you. Also, this recording will be sent to you, so you can share it with other people who are interested to hear from this panel. And I believe that is it for today. I want to point out to you tomorrow there is another town hall with George Heyman, with Leah, George Wilson, and with Christine Boyle and Jenny Kwan, also about the green and just recovery. I invite you to also sign up for that. I think there's lots of good conversation to be expected there too. So thank you very much for attending, for your input, for your questions, and thank you panel members, Bowinn, Jonathan, Jessica, and Kate for being here, and of course Shayna for pulling it all together. It was a great job. Thank you very much. And I look forward to hearing from you.